Welcome to my show. I'm a guest here. Her name is Lilli Correll. Mrs. Lilli, how are you doing, ma?
Great. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Mrs. Lilli. Firstly, you are the founder of Resolve to Rise. You're also an author. You've written a book, and you're also a speaker and a licensed counselor. Can you please, Mrs. Lilli, discuss more about yourself and how you are doing currently now, Lilli?
Absolutely. I have had the privilege of working for some of the largest healthcare companies, health plans in the world, including United Health Group, and working on systems of care to really help individuals with serious mental illness and substance use disorders. I've seen both where the system can help support individuals in their trajectory through the system of care. And then I've seen where we really drop the ball and don't do a good job. So that has made me very passionate about making sure that people who are struggling with specifically trauma, but anything that goes along with trauma, which you and I kind of visited about substance use disorder, um, that underlying issue is being addressed and that people feel supported and encouraged and celebrated in their resilience as they go on their healing journey. So that's my mission in life, is to create a healthcare system that embraces those folks and helps them heal.
Definitely, completely agree, Lily. Like, we definitely hope that the world continues to heal. There are a lot of things really causing a lot of trauma today in our world today. And I also like to dive to the point of your book, Lily. You've written a book called Resolve to Rise, if I'm correct. Do you have any book you are planning to write in the coming future? And can you please discuss more on that book, Mrs. Lily?
Um, I also went through trauma within my family of origin. My dad was the first man in the state of Massachusetts to win custody of his children because my mom was so violently abusive. It left me completely dysregulated, and my role in my family, and then as I grew up into an adult, was a role of savior. So I was trying to make sure that I was constantly monitoring how people were doing and making sure everything stayed calm so that no one got hurt, because in my childhood people got hurt, and I didn't realize how dysregulated my nervous system was, or that it was caused by trauma. So when I got into a professional career and I was very successful, I was still getting triggered, and I felt like I was broken and irreparably damaged. No matter how much counseling I got, I just grew an insight into when I was being triggered, but I wasn't able to navigate it as effectively as I wanted to. And I would spiral into bouts of shame. So, as I started to work through and heal from my own trauma, I really wanted to send a message out to other people who were also struggling, which is what my book is, that those behaviors, that reactivity, those are adaptive, not a sign of being defective, but actually because your nervous system has adapted to being in a state of fight or flight at all times. It was survival. And so my book is a framework that walks through everything from just knowing that trauma happens and it's actually more pervasive than we think it is. What are the symptoms that go along with that? And then what is a path that one could take to start healing from post-traumatic stress disorder? And if you're using substances, for instance, or you're self-harming, or you're doing something like that that's damaging, being able to first respect that that is and was adaptive, and that it's helped you in some way, and to understand how it's helped you so that you can start to figure out more life-giving ways of addressing those issues that are very real. So that's my
Completely.
book, is in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Lily. Like, definitely, a lot of things does happen, and I'm very glad that the book is something that really teach one who could, try his or her best to, take steps he or herself could do to possibly heal from the trauma that is, he or she is passing through. Thank you so much, Mrs. Lily. I would like to dive to the point of that trauma too, because we know trauma is something that is really happening. It's definitely a price. Even I myself have faced this once time during my past time, so it's definitely not an easy thing as a person. So, how do you think trauma definitely impacts the brain, and how do you think it's increased? Because when it gets to a time, Mrs. Lily, someone would just feel like, let me just look for something that could just make me feel better, stuff like that. How do you think it's increased the risk of substance abuse, Mrs. Lily?
You know, when you go through, especially when it's repetitive abuse or trauma of some nature, it might not be abuse. It's an abuse of power. Trauma is always the result of an abuse of power, pretty much, if it's repetitive in nature. So it could be, societally or in a political system where the abuse isn't necessarily inflicted by a parent, but by the political system in which that person lives. But when there's a repetitive type of traumatic experience, your brain starts to catch on to the fact that, oh, we need to be in hypervigilance, hyperarousal at all times so that we can protect ourselves. That's real, right? I mean, you're having repeated traumatic experiences, so that's the right response. The problem is that the parts of your brain that are responsible for fight or flight get hyperactive, and the parts of your brain responsible for problem solving and being able to be resourced are decreased in their activity. And so when the traumatic experiences discontinue, you may find that you're still in a state of hypervigilance and hyperarousal. They've seen impacts to a part of the brain called, well, it's a network of parts of the brain called the default mode network. That is active when you're just kind of idling. You're not really thinking about much at all. But for a person with trauma, the impact to that default mode network causes issues where you start ruminating about negative types of things. So, for instance, if something comes up and you feel guilty or ashamed, you might just go round and round and round about this overwhelming sense of guilt you can't let go of. Even if there's a part of your brain that says this isn't a big deal, other people make mistakes too, you can't let go of it because of that, the impact that happens in that particular network of your brain. And so, what will happen oftentimes is individuals who go through traumatic experiences will dissociate because of the overwhelm, that psychological overwhelm that happens. And that dissociation will be a disconnection from what's going on around them. As time goes on, at least this is what I found, and I think many other people do, as time got on and I got into junior high, I stopped being able to dissociate as well. And so now I was sitting in this sense of self loathing and triggered hypervigilance and felt a lot of shame that just I couldn't shake. So I decided I'm just going to use substances because I don't want to feel this. I just want to disconnect entirely.
Mm.
And so using substances can be a way of numbing the intensity of what's coming up for you when dissociation is not able to do that for you. So oftentimes people will find that the substances keep them from having to deal with the intensity of that trauma response.
Wow, that is really, really, really powerful. Like, that's really, really massive, Mrs. Lily. Like, that means if someone is getting to a point that one can be thinking, I do not want just want to be with people. I don't want to be around people. That could be a sign that one is getting to a point whereby he or she could look for something that could make he or she just feel that's better and just disconnect, which will continue to just come on and on and on again. Thank you so much, Mrs. Lily. And probably I do not know if there are also specific meditation that could possibly help individual that that is getting into this trauma that could lead to this substance abuse that could possibly lead to that situation. If there are also specific medication or help that individual can do, dealing with this situation, Mrs. Lily.
There's so many diagnoses that come along oftentimes with complex PTSD, and complex PTSD being PTSD that's made complex by the repetitive nature of the trauma. that we were just talking about. Um, and because of that, oftentimes people will end up seeking help from a psychiatrist who might actually give them medications to address the symptoms of depression, symptoms of anxiety, symptoms of the flashbacks and maybe difficulty going to sleep at night. So you might end up on a mood stabilizer, an antidepressant. You may have difficulty focusing. That's very common for individuals who have complex PTSD. So you may end up on some kind of medication that's a stimulant to kind of help you to focus, as well as medications like trazodone that help you go to sleep at night. I personally, and there's nothing wrong with taking medications. That's great. If the symptoms are too severe and it's disrupting your day-to-day life, sometimes medications are necessary. Medications don't address the underlying issue of dysregulation and hyperarousal. And so, what you want to make sure is that you have a therapist that you're working with who's very familiar with dealing with trauma and helping people heal, and also has some evidence based approaches available to them. The leading evidence based approaches right now for trauma are cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure therapy, as well as EMDR, you hear a lot about. Unfortunately, those specific approaches require a person to deal with their trauma content head on. The number two symptom in PTSD is an avoidance of trauma reminders. So, for somebody who's highly dissociative, who is not wanting to deal with what happened to them, it's too overwhelming, it's too much. Sometimes those approaches are triggering and actually make things worse rather than better. So, in those instances, I really encourage people to look for more embodied approaches like somatic experiencing or trauma sensitive yoga, or even doing grounding exercises, which you can go online and look up grounding exercises. You'll see a whole host of different things you can do. I personally love the idea of feeling your feet on the ground, even taking your shoes and socks off and putting them in the grass so you can feel that texture. Excuse me. Putting an ice pack on the back of your neck can be really, really helpful to kind of ground you back into your body in the moment. So just starting to get back into the body and feeling safe again, I feel like is a really great place to start. Some people who do those approaches, that's all they need, and they're healing and their nervous system calms down. Some people are able to get to a place where they feel safe enough to start doing therapies like EMDR, cognitive processing therapy, or prolonged exposure. Another approach is neurofeedback, which you put electrodes basically on your head. You're watching a movie or playing a game. And as your brain gets excited, that hypervigilance or even depressed, it will dim the TV and quiet the sound. And when your brain starts to resource and get those brain waves on board that are problem solving, then it gets brighter. And then you can hear the volume better, which is a reward to your brain. And so you literally just sit and you watch a show doing nothing and watch the TV go, dim and quiet and bright and loud, and you see the fluctuations as your brain is learning to be more resourced. And I like that approach too, because it does not require a person to talk about their trauma.
I completely agree. I definitely wish, we still have this huge community that definitely still assists in this type of situation. This is not a easy situation. So no, I know community is really fading currently. It's not like before, but I would like to also ask how you feel like society could better, address this situation related to trauma. Some people that are probably having this substance issue. Some people in the community knows that this person is facing serious issue, is using substance. Some people know, but this community has really caused a lot of. But I would like to personally still ask, like, how do you think society can better, address these situations?
That's a great question. I think there's so many cultures too that are even more strong in feeling like that a substance use disorder or even the symptoms I've been talking about from trauma, even if you didn't use substances or do something else, that it's just a matter of picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and moving on, that you should be strong enough, that that's a sign of weakness and inadequacy in some way. And so I think that the more we understand and we can see the impacts, which they're seeing on functional MRIs, to the brain of individuals who have had this repetitive trauma. And we see in the ACEs study where they assessed how many different traumatic types of experiences did you have? And the more experiences, the more likely a person was to be using substances, and the more likely they were to use more dangerous substances, the more number of traumatic events. The more we're able to make that connection, I think it helps people to understand that it isn't a moral character defect or um, person not being motivated, that it really is something that has impacted them and changed their brains. And there is a way to address that. I think some cultures are further along in destigmatizing those individuals and their behaviors and challenges than other cultures are. And I'm sure that you understand that very well. Um, so I think one of the things, you hear big executives in the largest healthcare system in the world saying the brain is connected to the body, but they're still separating it, right? The brain and the body, they're connected. No, it's one system, right? It's kind of like we expect that when we go to work, we don't take our personal life there. But when we go home, we take our work to home all the time, and that's totally fine here in the US at least. We need to let people be whole people wherever they are and give them resources to address whatever comes up. And I think I'm kind of going round and round about this, but we do have just a tremendous amount of work to do, I think, in understanding, um, the process and not blaming the victim.
Yeah, a lot of work needs to be done. A lot of people are thinking of suicide, stuff like that every single day. Sometimes I even hear per minute. When I hear per minute, I just used to be like, hey, per minute, things like this happen. So it definitely happened. And I also agree with you with that culture. Even in my own culture, yeah, it's probably different with the way they address stuff like that. Thank you so much, Mrs. Lilly. And lastly, I would like to go to the point of people. Some people feel like they can never get out of the situation again. Some people feel like it's just going to be there. I just want to continue to do it. There was a story I was hearing. This happened in my country. The person has used, oh my God, like it was just too much. It was huge. Probably all this celebrity lifestyle. So it was really, really massive. And nobody knew such person would be having such traumatic situation. So some people feel like they can't get out of it anymore. So what advice do you think you would give to someone who feel hopeless and in their recovery journey, Mrs. Lilly?
Yeah, and again, that is the entirety of who I am speaking to, is people who feel like they're stuck in their situation. And the message is that you're resilient and you can heal. And the proof is how jacked up you are. Really. Your brain is adaptive. It's a beautiful thing. It came into a space of understanding, your brain and your body, that it was not able to trust its environment. And so it had to be on high alert all the time. That is not a bad thing. The bad thing is that it changes your brain. And when that trauma is over, you're still in that hypervigilance. It no longer fits the situation. And it's time to look for new resources and start to learn to calm down your nervous system so that you can claim that life that you want to live. But it's not impossible. There are ways to do it. And I just think the more people understand those responses as adaptive, that they're actually a sign of strength and resilience in and of themselves, the more that they can step into resilience in a way that they choose rather than self-harming, whether it be self-harming through literally physically self-harming or substance use. Like I said, I myself was using, I took anything anyone would give me. I didn't even care what it was. I just didn't want to be present. I wanted to check out. But I realized that with support, I could face my life and start working through the really scary stuff. And it took years because it was terrifying stuff. But it is possible, and we are resilient, and we can heal from this and claim a fulfilling and joyful life.
Exactly. And Mrs. Lilly, you are a big example that this can definitely happen. You remember when I even told you that I also did this to honor my mom. During that time, I lost my mom. I was very young. So it was
Yeah.
really heavy. It's not easy, as a young guy to lose is someone that is very close to him. It's not easy. So it was one of the reasons why the trauma really came in during that time. But I thank God that everything is, probably the podcast and everything is making everything to just calm down and everything is going well. And you are also a very big inspiration to many people today that this can definitely happen. I also recommend people to also read that your book. That your book will be a very, very powerful one. I want to sincerely thank you for the opportunity. And lastly, Mrs. Lilly, there's a question I normally ask during the end of the show. From our forefathers, from the father who have passed on during the historic time, there's a lot of things that do normally exist during our forefathers' time, during those historic time, that is missing in our time today. If there is anyone or anything you would like to bring back to our time today, Mrs. Lilly, what do you think that thing will be, ma'am?
I think getting more in touch with the fundamental meaning of life, our connection to each other. I think many generations before us working the land, being, bartering and being able to bring your strengths and your unique gifts to your culture to help everyone thrive. We have become so singular in our existence that we forget that you are my brother and I am your sister, and we are connected in spirit. If I do my work, you're positively impacted by it. If you do yours, I'm positively impacted because we're part of a larger system. And I think that it's so much easier to see that connectivity and that reliance when you are doing things like working the land and supporting each other than when you are distinct and doing your own thing.
Completely agree. Completely agree, Mrs. Lilly. It's definitely not easy. A lot of people are just, everything is just lonely, lonely, lonely. It is just the way it is currently. We just hope this world, I just used to feel like we hope this world heal because it is really, really, it is really, really massive. A lot of things are happening. Even with the way we are talking currently, stuffs are happening. And I also want to thank you for giving me this chance again. It's a huge opportunity. Thank you so much, Mrs. Lilly, for the opportunity, for the time, and also
Thank,
having, the interest to speak on the trauma. Thank you so much, Mrs. Lilly.
thank you.
All right, ma. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye bye.